Welcome back, pet parent. Today I have one of the coolest guests I could possibly have for you. And I don't say that just because she's staring at me on the screen right now. I say that because I got to meet her about a year and a half ago at the AHVMA conference in San Diego, and she just blew me away with how casually she's just like knows so much. And I love it. I love that she's so willing to not only help her animal patients, but to help other people do better with their animal patients. And so I would love to welcome a recipient of the Carvel, is it Teichert?
Teaker,
Teacher. A recent recipient of the Carvel Teacher Lifetime Achievement Award at the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association, Dr. PJ Broadfoot. Thank you so much for being here with us today. How the heck
thanks
are
for
you?
inviting me, Jessica. I am great. Well, I say that. It is cold here, and I don't like cold weather. I left Kansas because I didn't like cold weather. I think it followed me to Arkansas. It's like been in the teens and supposed to get down into the single digits, which is generally not in Arkansas. It's not going to last very long, but it kind of feels like I'm into Arctic. So.
I can't even. I'm in Central Texas, and I definitely did not come here to yesterday wake up to 21 degrees. I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah, we at least didn't get the 8 inches of snow they got in northwest Arkansas. Just got an inch. So, but it is cold. It's been really cold.
Well, spring is coming.
Yep,
So something to look forward to. We're over the hump of the middle of winter at least.
that's right.
So hopefully spring will be here before we know it. But you have been a practicing veterinarian for quite some time. And you are not only into some really cool holistic modalities, but some that I had never heard of, and probably more that I have still not heard of. Which isn't, a big leap, but it amazes me how much there is out there. And I'd love to start off just by giving a brief synopsis of like your story and how you got to be where you are and how much you love animals and all of that jazz.
Well, I got into veterinary medicine. I'm actually from a very medical family. My real dad was a doctor. He was a neurologist. My stepdad was an internist, cardiologist. My grandfather was a general practitioner. They didn't specialize in those days. And interestingly enough, the person that he had take care of his family back in the 30s probably was a homeopath, an MD homeopath, before the Flexner report completely squashed homeopathy in the United States. So my stepdad was really, really open to all kinds of stuff. They used homeopathy in his family, and he actually used an herbal for hypertension in his patients. So he just had he never believed the statin stuff, the cholesterol stuff. He was kind of a skeptic of a lot of those things. So medicine was just kind of in the genes, I guess. It was in my family. When I decided I was going to go to vet school, my stepdad said, "Honey, don't you want to be a real doctor?" We laughed, we joked for years that I didn't want to be an RD. I wanted to be a DVM, not an RD, a real doctor. So, and with time, he came to terms. He had one of his other kids. One of my younger sister became an MD, so he got an MD out of the sibling bunch, so he was fine. And then we've got I've got a niece going to med school, a nephew that is a anesthesiologist. My son is a pathologist. So we've contributed more to the human side of it. Not one of my 4 children wanted to be veterinarians. It's kind of sad. I think that dragging them out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning to go on emergency calls probably broke through any aspirations of being veterinarians. So anyway, I went to vet school, and my first introduction to anything holistic in the veterinary world, we actually at K State of all places, which is obviously not one of your alternative medicine, integrative medicine kinds of schools, had a couple of acupuncturists come in and talk to the student chapter AVMA, and so I knew there was something else out there. It was the first time I'd heard of acupuncture, but I knew that there were other things out there. So kind of gave me just an inkling that we didn't what we learned in vet school wasn't all there was to know. And vet school just left all kinds of trails of odds and ends of things. They talked about actually fecal microbial transplants. And I'm old. I got out in 1981. And they talked about fecal microbial transplants. The first one I ever did was in 1981 on a horse when I worked on the set of The Blue and the Gray, which was a miniseries that was done back then. I had a horse that colicked, and he was a valuable horse. None of the drugs touched him. I mean, none of them. So I remembered something, one of those offhand comments that one of the clinicians made, and I took poop from several different horses and mules, and I put it down with a nasogastric tube, and it was like miraculous. And I didn't do it again for about 30 years, which is really stupid. But I got that, little bit of information in vet school, and then they talked about butazolidine was retarded bone healing in racehorses. So I knew that as far back as the 70s, we knew that nonsteroidals retarded healing. But when you get out of school and that all you have is bute and aspirin and Arquel, which didn't last very long in the market, so I'm guessing it was deadly. That was before the internet, so I don't really even know what happened to it, but it just kind of disappeared. Learned about autologous blood therapy of all things from a cow vet who said, well, if you can't get that cow over it, take a slug of blood out of the jugular and put it back in the hip. And at the time I thought, what a weird thing to say. But, then I started learning about autologous blood therapies when I started doing a lot of the homotox stuff. And for years, I lectured for years on autologous blood therapies. And I finally went down a rabbit hole. That had to have come from somewhere in the United States. And because why would that veterinarian at K-State have even mentioned that? And it turns out that a MD named Rosenau, I think, was doing autologous blood therapy at one of the big schools, Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic. He was doing blood therapies. So, but you can't patent blood. So it kind of fell out of favor, but it's an immensely valuable form of therapy because it's basically body-specific immunotherapy. So, there were other things, that people just mentioned in vet school, that steroids should be a line of last resort and things that kind of colored my looking for other things when I got out. And then when I got out, God just dropped things in my lap. Every once in a while, it's like, here, look at this, look at that. And then I get a case that nothing else would work on, and then you'd have to be looking for something else. That's how I got started on homotox. And then thymus extracts I learned when I was in Germany. Couldn't find any thymus extracts when I got home, but I learned about it there. And then someone happened to just walk in my clinic one day that was a rep for a different company. This thymus extract wasn't handled by anybody. And he said, "Are you interested in thymus extracts?" It's like, my gosh, yes. And about 2 weeks later, I got a box in the mail from Hawaii, these little lyophilized vials and a diluent. And I thought, I have no idea what to do with this at this point in time. What I learned about it for was cancer. Didn't have a cancer case at the time. But then I got a last-ditch effort case on a cat, and I gave it to him because absolutely nothing else worked. And that's why you get those, is so that you use them, and then you're down that track. We've used it on thousands of cases since that cat's name was Stevie, and we've used it on thousands of cases since then. So, so it's one thing after another that just, here, try this.
Yes. Oh my goodness. There's so much in there. I think to be learned. But so a couple of the things that I had never heard of thymus extract before I met you, and I had heard but had not really utilized deer antler velvet.
Trailer.
Deer velvet.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so those are a couple of things that I find incredibly intriguing in both cases. What are they? How do you use them? It sounds like with thymus you use it for quite a bit.
Yeah, just about everything. Basically, it's the linchpin of the immune system. So it helps to counterbalance the T3s, T4s. So whether you've got a hyperimmune state or a hypoimmune state, whether you've got cancer or autoimmunity or inflammation, it actually has some shock effects. It's just an amazing, but you think about it, the linchpin of the immune system, it shrinks with age. Doesn't mean it does not work at all anymore, but it does, and you can regrow a thymus, which I think is pretty interesting. But it's so integral to the immune system, which is the center point of everything. So we use it off label as an injectable. more often than not, is an autologous blood therapy, and we use it. You can use it in acupuncture points. I do acupuncture. I only know a few good points. I've learned a few here and there, and I put them in those points if I know, which ones to use. You can use it sub-Q, IM. It's just an absolutely amazing therapy. And, we've done a lot of lectures on cases that we've had that have just been, kind of the blow you away, just, that's what worked. So thymus extract's been a big part of my armamentarium probably for about 12 years or so now. Deer antler was kind of funny because I happened to, they were at AHVMA one year, the New Zealand people were, and was walking around the exhibit hall, and the thing that attracted me to it wasn't the deer antler, which I didn't know anything about. It was the fact that they used perna, which is the greenlet mussel, and perna changed the way I practiced medicine back about 1983, 1984, because it's a regenerative. It has anti-inflammatory capabilities. It has 9 glycosaminoglycans, 53 fatty acids, 3 of which are that we know are anti-inflammatory. So I had always used detroscience, and that changed the way I practiced, literally, because I knew nonsteroidals retarded healing. Because the thing that actually recruits stem cells for healing is the inflammation. So if you give an anti-inflammatory in an acute injury, you have retarded healing on a cellular level. So when I ran across the perna, that just completely changed the way I practiced, because there was something else that you could use in an acute injury, or in chronic injuries. We use it for dogs with, chronic arthritis. Interestingly enough, it can also help with, bladder disease in cats, because and gastrointestinal issues, because it has N-acetylglucosamine in it, which is the primary coater of the mucous membranes. So, yeah, we had a cat that had been on antibiotics like forever. I just one after another. And I don't like antibiotics to begin with. I really detest them now. I use them every once in a while, but, there has to be a clear indication for it. But this cat, it was driving me crazy, because we just kept, she'd be on the antibiotics, she'd clear up. A few weeks later, she'd be back in with another UTI. So I finally said, Luann, we're missing something here. I don't know what it is, but I put her on New Cat, which at that time had perna. It doesn't have perna in it anymore, but it was like a broad spectrum, kind of a nutritional supplement. And lo and behold, that cat cleared up, and went years without another UTI. Then, years, and I thought, I had no idea really what component of that helped, until there was actually a journal article that was talking about injectable glycans for cats with cystitis, and I went, it was the perna. So we have used perna and/or N-acetylglucosamine now for decades for cats with cystitis. So, and N-acetylglucosamine has actually been used for people with IBS, IBD, and it can reduce the stress. It's that gut-brain highway thing. There are people. There's no research on it. I looked. At least there wasn't a few years ago. But there were a lot of people who took N-acetylglucosamine that said that their stress levels reduced remarkably when they were taking N-acetylglucosamine for their gut. So, yeah, there's always new stuff to learn. So anyway, back to how I ended up on deer antler. I digress a lot. They had perna. They had this product called I think it was called dog agility or something at the time. But it was deer antler and perna. So I thought, well, I really don't know anything about deer antler, and I didn't at that time didn't really think I needed much of anything else for the arthritis. But at NABC one year, I was invited to a dinner with a bunch of veterinarians from Israel, and most of them used the deer antler and liked it a lot. And I thought, well, there's enough people here that find it useful that I went ahead and got some of it. And the first dog I put on it was doing better. She had been improving with time, but when she came into my practice, she'd had a cruciate surgery done a year or so before, and the surgery went fine. She never used the leg. She was just packing that leg. So she was 3-legged, and she started blowing the other cruciate. I mean, couldn't squat to pee, and so the owner told me, he said, if you can't help her, we're going to have to put her down because she literally cannot urinate. You know, nothing like being under the gun. So we started her on complex homeopathics. We were doing injections on her. And then I sent her to a friend of mine who does prolotherapy. I don't inject joints. It makes me nervous. So he was doing quite a bit of prolo at the time, and I sent her there, and that improved her. So we were getting some, we were moving in the right direction. We did some supplements on her, and then I had gotten the deer antler perna in, and I said, well, let's try this on her. Her name was Cassie, and she was a weenie, so that was probably fine. She was just a weenie about it. So we put her on the deer antler, and I am telling you, it was not very long. That dog was running, and both legs. I mean, using both legs, including the leg that she hadn't used in a year. So then I was hooked because you know, when you think about it, deer antler is the only mammalian tissue that regenerates every year. It goes from
Wow.
a blastema to a rack. It grows an inch or two a day. There's called Cervus elephas. This is the variety in New Zealand that they harvest those from, an inch or two a day. That is a phenomenal rate of regeneration. So you can imagine that there's a lot of regenerative potential in those antlers. So we use a lot of it, and then we developed a formula that has deer antler, perna, thymus, colostrum, and an algae. And the algae that I wanted is AFA algae, which grows in a lake in Oregon, and it also was another game changer in my practice. I love blue green algae, but they don't have anything like that in New Zealand. It's a cold water algae, and the lake that it grows in is frigid. I tried to walk through the headwaters of it one year, and I levitated out of the water. It was so cold, I couldn't walk. There was people swimming in that, and I could even walk in it. It's freezing. So, but to maintain cellular integrity in that cold lake, that algae has to put a lot of omega-3 fatty acids into the cell wall. So it is literally the bottom of the food chain for omega-3 fatty acids.
Mm.
So, and we made a powder in the clinic. We don't. It's not commercially available at this point in time, but we have added that blue green algae to our powder at the clinic. But the one that they still make in New Zealand has a red algae, which it was kind of a funny deal. I was looking for an algae that they harvested in New Zealand, and I found this kind of a abstract on a study that was where it showed that they were using this particular algae, red algae, but it turned the oil green. And I said, well, it has to have chlorophyll. I was looking for chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a base. The body can actually nearly free substitute the iron molecule into the algae to make blood. So it's a blood builder. It's a blood builder. My mother went from a hemoglobin of 4 to a hemoglobin of 10, just taking the blue-green algae from Klamath. So anyway, I was looking for green algae, but it was just an abstract. I couldn't get the paper, so I contacted Barry, and the lady who'd done the work was in Christchurch, New Zealand, and she said, he calls me up and he said, "Hey, Jai, I saw that she was in Christchurch, so I rang her." Next thing I know, so I'm talking to this researcher who's probably kind of thrilled that somebody actually read her paper, and she said, "Oh yeah, that is a green algae in a red coat." So it actually does have chlorophyll in it, and that's what's in what's called pentagenesis, which is the algae combination that with the thymus and the colostrum and the antler and the perna. So that has been a really, really good combination for a lot of dogs, for a lot of different combinations of problems. So we use a lot of that one.
Wow. I mean, I feel like that's enough information. Like people could stop there if they wanted to. Please don't, because there's so much more coming. But they could stop there and be like, "You blew my mind. I need to think on this for a couple of days, and I'm gonna come back and listen to the rest." That was so much.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the funny thing. That's my modus operandi is I use something, and then if it works, then I have to know why. So then I'm down rabbit holes for days or weeks on end. Actually, that we're getting ready to hopefully develop a thymus book. But when I went to gather the data that I have like 34 of information on thymus extract alone. So there's not a large language model right now that can handle it. Now Neo, which is now I take it back. I think the new one is called Enoch, but Mike Adams, who's the health ranger, has developed a large language model that probably can handle all that data. And part of the reason there's so much of it is I've got videos and pictures and there's so much data to collate that needs to be kind of put in a framework that's digestible.
Yeah.
So, and then I did 7 hours of video of an interview with Dr. Ushijima that developed the thymus extract. So 7 hours of conversation with absolutely one of the most brilliant people on the planet. So, that's a lot to kind of distill down to. And a lot of the things that I used it for were because of things that he's, would say like in passing. It's like he said they had a dozen patients with end stage emphysema that they gave. Well, one of the docs I was working with him said, "Hey, do you think this would work if we nebulized it?" And he said, "No." They did it anyway. They got no less than 100% improvement in lung function on these people with end stage emphysema. The average was 300% improvement in lung function. Some of those people went back to smoking. It's like, in the
Would you
world.
do that?
Why would you do that? Yeah. But some of them went to go back to playing golf. I mean, they got their lives back. And these
Yeah.
were people that were living on oxygen. So, and then just, it's like every time you talk to them, there's some other story. They had 30 some patients that went into remission with end stage cancers. With thymus is great. Some of those things that works better with the synergist. So BCG, SPL, colostrum. So they had, but just really fascinating cases. And the first place he used it was for with calf syndrome, which was, I don't know if they ever did actually figure out what the causative organism was, but they assume it's a virus or maybe a retrovirus. But these cows had dropped calves and they wouldn't get up. They just died. So the producers are just in a panic. And I think I remember this when I was in vet school, this weak calf syndrome. And of course, I was long before the internet, so I haven't been able to find anything on it. But one thing that they found when Dr. Ushijima did the necropsies on them was their thymus was shrunken down enough. Virtually, he said, where do they put the thymus in cattle? He's Japanese, so sometimes some of the things he says
Yeah.
they sound kind of funny. I love it. So anyway, they found virtually no thymus, and they should be big
Yeah.
in a newborn. So he happened to read, another one of those God things. You just happened to read some research articles by a researcher named Goldstein, who was doing work on thymus extract. So they did a crude extract, and they said, well, just give this much, inject this much three times, 3 doses. And the producers were in a week or two. They're just smiling ear to ear, saying, "Hey, doc, we got a problem." They're smiling. They were having to rope them to give them the third dose. And these were cats that were dying. So, that was pretty amazing. And then they did respiratory syncytial virus in pigs and stopped losses in a hog farm. And so, then it got legs. The other MDs got very involved in it. They had a case of a young woman who had internal scleroderma, which is a death sentence, basically. And they had said scleroderma was one of the things they weren't going to treat because it was so resistant to any kind of treatment. Well, this happened to be the niece of one of the MDs that was working with him. So they gave her the thymus extract, and she went into remission. So, and they tried to send that information to the scleroderma people. All these societies that are always looking for money. Nobody was interested. We had a couple of dogs with alopecia ectodermal, which is a genetic thing where they kind of end up looking like a lion with no hair and etc. Weird tufts on different parts of the body. And we had several of those that grew coat back completely, grew their coats back. And so I tried to contact the people that were the alopecia X people. Never heard back from them. So I know it's like, how much do you really want to know? I
Yeah.
mean, how hard would it be to do a short trial? There's a lot of alopecia X dogs out there. So I had one in my practice. We treated a case on in California that completely grew her coat. So, we had pretty good luck with it. So that was actually with algae. The first dog that I treated was algae and penta. So and then but the dog in California only got penta. a deer antler combination.
Wow. So, okay, I have to ask because it's obviously miraculous what it does. But one of the things that comes to mind with any supplement that I'm looking at is how are we getting it? Like, and I don't say that to be like we shouldn't be using it, but you brought up colostrum, which I do use sometimes with some animals that I'm working with. But I know there are, moral and ethical issues around it. How do we get the thymus extract? And are there issues that we need to be aware of?
Well, the thymus extract can be actually, you can use it from any species, basically. Thymus is thymus. Most of it comes from the slaughterhouses.
Okay.
So, it would be one of those things that'd be thrown away or put into animal feed or whatever. It is, the more sustainably you can resource it, the better. I had a encounter with what was she? Naturopath, I think, in Chicago a few years ago, and her mother was treated with thymus extract for an autoimmune condition, if I recall correctly. And they were using rabbit thymus. I don't know
Interesting.
if they were extracting that evidently, probably from one of the bigger slaughterhouses. When I was lecturing in Leon, Mexico, many years ago, there was a veterinarian who came up and told me after my presentation that they had treated I think it was a tiger with a non-healing wound, that it was just not responding to anything, and they treated that big cat with crocodile thymus.
Wow.
So
So this is something that presumably the animal is slaughtered and then you harvest the thymus.
yes.
It's not okay. Got it. All right. I don't know why that just like popped in my head. I'm like, I need to know the answer to that.
Well, and it's a good question because you want to know that, I mean, that you're not just killing something for one thing. So no, it's just it's like sweetbreads, I think, are thymus. So, and the question also comes up often on the deer antler, and they don't kill those deer. They harvest them. Why? They sedate them or anesthetize them. I'm not sure which, but they have done cortisol studies on those before and after, and there's virtually no, they virtually have no changes in their stress hormones. So, and they're, if you don't harvest them, they injure each other. They are pastured animals. So, and you don't want to run a bunch of boys together and have them. I just read something someone was asking about. It can improve clotting mechanisms. So then, of course, the question is it a problem? Does it make them clot too much? Which I've never seen that, honestly, to be an issue at all. But there's actually a study that was done that showed that deer have a more robust clotting mechanism because when they fight, they would bleed out if they got too much damage. So it's actually, I think it's a balancing. It's another one of those things that's a balancing thing. So I don't think there's so much of it that it would interfere with, like if you had a human on anti-clotting drugs. I would think that might keep them actually from turning into hemophiliacs. There's so many people that just bruise like crazy when they're on those drugs. They need a balance to that. And I don't know that there's any study that's been done, as far as not using it. Usual response on the conventional side is not to use anything that counter affects what is being given, even if what is the side effects of what is being given are really relatively awful. So I think that using something like the antler, if it has that, could probably rather nicely counterbalance the overt or the tendency to bleed too profusely.
Interesting, interesting. So I do want to talk about homeopathy, but before we do, I think sticking on this supplement topic a little bit because we were just briefly chatting before I hit record. The supplement world is mind-boggling. It is
Overwhelming.
literally
It is.
And I have definitely had people on the podcast in the past where, we've had this conversation about choosing supplementation and kind of how to figure out, even I still sometimes will fall for that, shiny object syndrome. Marketing is, boy, it can really, really get to us. And I think that's why the supplement world is so confusing for so many pet parents. So what are, like, when you are looking at supplements, we were talking briefly, you have a lot of homeopathy, and also a good amount of supplements that, you have in your back pocket. When you are looking at supplementing an animal, regardless of what issue we're talking about, like, are there some defining factors where you're like, definitely not looking at that anymore, or I think this has a good possibility that we could find, like, what are some of your, like, qualifications for choosing a good supplement?
Okay, so the first thing I look at is there a kind of a whole plate, a full plate that we can give the body so it can pick and choose what it wants. So that's where I put stuff like the AFA algae, which is grows in a lake with a 35-foot mineral base. It has all 20 amino acids. It has omega-3 fatty acids. It's got minerals. It's got vitamins. So that a lot of times you can give that and it's actually a photobiomodulator. It's a photon emitter, which in cancer, you've lost your light emission. Part of the cell-to-cell communication is light, which is vital photons, and frequency. They sing to one another. So if you lose that cell-to-cell communication, you're one step away from ending up with a cancer somewhere. So anything we can do to help restore that is bound to be helpful. So it's an alkalizer, which most of us run acidic to high degree. Just lifestyle and food and other stress, all those things probably contribute to body acidities. So for most patients, I'm a big fan of that's a no harm strategy. We actually make 4 supplements in the clinic that are based on that blue green algae. Now we target them. One is more for allergy and general wellness. We have one that's more for arthritis. We have one that's more for immune. And then we have the one that we've made recently with the deer antler, which we don't produce enough of that to do commercially. But the AFA is kind of the defining factor in all of that because I have notebooks, like 4 notebooks that are 2 or 3 inches deep. One just on kids stuff, which is actually one of the reasons I got started. That's the reason I got started lecturing. Actually, was because of the drugging of children, and the algae turned my ricochet rabbit child into completely normal in 10 days. Now he didn't stay that way unless he was on the algae for a while. But it was so apparent that his kindergarten teacher could tell that he'd been off it for a couple of days. And my
Yeah.
staff, got off the bus and came into clinic, and my Susan and Corey looked at me and said, "He's not taking his algae, is he?" It was like you could just see him. It was like this, and he turned out to be a great kid. But when I was in vet school, they actually used Ritalin to hop racehorses. Literally, it was speed for racehorses. So that was not going in one of my kids. And my first lectures that I ever did was because of the children being drugged in large numbers. So that's the bottom of the food chain. My asthma kid was off of asthma drugs within 6 months, and he was a critical asthmatic, so that wasn't a small thing. So, and my mother had diagnosed with breast cancer in 1996. I started giving her the algae months before that because we knew she was sick. All my sisters and I got together. Something wrong with mom. She's not herself at all. She was coughing, she was tiring, she was sleeping more, and that's not her. She's a ball of fire. So that was 1996. We started on the algae in May of 96. She was diagnosed in September. She had mastectomy. She had no chemo, no radiation, and she just turned 96 last August. So still taking the algae, and her hemoglobin went from 4 to 10. So she hasn't been getting blood transfusions for the last 40 years either. So, Perna to me is a full plate for the joints. It does other things, like we talked about, gastrointestinal and urinary tract and stuff, but it has 9-glycosaminoglycan. So everything that is intended to make a joint is in that green lip muscle. For them to survive, they have to be able to open and close. So that is and that the I don't know if you remember seeing the advertisements for like Omega XL and some of those. They're a green lip muscle extract. They're of that well, maybe all of the fatty acids. I don't know that they fractionate them, but there's one of the novel fatty acids in that's called icosahexatetranoic acid (ETA). It is like 300 times more potent than salmon oil as an anti-inflammatory.
Wow.
So you have to be careful when you're looking at Purna products because they're extracting that oil out of a lot of it. So a lot of things have got the glycans and stuff, but they don't have the fatty acid, which is one of the anti-inflammatory components of that. So, if you see Purna on something, be somewhat skeptical that it doesn't have, that it's not a full plate, that the omega-3s are not in it. So I'm a big fan of that as a whole food thing. And then things like colostrum tend to really be kind of a whole food. There's just a lot of factors for regeneration in colostrum. So, and then from there, we kind of look at what I consider targeted nutritionals. If you have a liver problem, we may be looking at silymarin. We may be looking at, not silymarin, silymarin, milk thistle. And I tend to do the whole herbal, rather than bits and pieces of things. I'm also a big fan of dimethylglycine, which is a targeted nutritional. It is not, mostly probably does liver stuff, but there's a whole book on DMG that's really fascinating. They've used it for neurological stuff. So it's a metabolite, but most of the time when you think about it, you think about it for liver stuff. And it does way more things than that in the body. And it was actually probably the second supplement I ever used. The first one I ever used was choline loading in dogs for senility. And then I read that it helped with reducing the frequency and severity of seizures in people. So we use a lot of it for seizure dogs as well.
Wow.
So that was the first one that I used. The second one was the dimethylglycine, because I had a horse. One of my horses had tying up syndrome, and that reduced the lactic acid and it improves the immune system. And it's really an amazing substance. But my friend that had told me about it said, well, they've got this product called Glycoflex that's pretty good for arthritis. Well, I'm ordering, you couldn't get them from distributors back then. So I ordered from Vermont. You had to order direct at the time. And so I ordered some of all they had was Glycoflex 300 milligram. That was it. And so that's what I ordered. And the dogs that couldn't get up, that were, the owners were threatening euthanasia because they just had no quality of life, were up and running. And it was like, my gosh,
Wow.
this is great. I mean, these are dogs that have already failed non-steroidals. So that was the third one I ever used, and then things just kept. I think the algae came in like 1995. Homotox was about 1995 because it was a dog that had an osteosarcoma and they did not want to take the leg off her and they didn't want to do chemo or radiation. And so I was scrambling. That was before Google, internet. And so I was fishing through journals and all kinds of stuff. And I finally got a copy of the Orange Book that a friend of mine had given me. And I knew about Traumeel. That was the only complex homeopathic I knew about. And I called them up and I said, I have an osteosarc dog. What do you have? And they sent me like a half dozen things. That dog lived a year and a half and was running and playing and compressed the bone. That tumor actually shrunk. So that got me hooked on Homotox. But as far as the other supplements, there's so many of them that are targeted for so many things. Alpha lipoic acid can help with liver failure. I mean, abject liver failure. Some really funny stories about alpha lipoic acid out there. Look up Bert Berkson and his adventure with alpha lipoic acid. Nearly got thrown out of med school because of alpha lipoic acid, but he saved some liver failures with it in the midst of all of that. And those are really very targeted nutritionals. And acetylcysteine, and there's an endless array of them. You can walk into any store, any herbal store, and there's a bazillion of them, and they're all slightly different. And so it is the difficulty is coming up with the right combination or the right starting point on those. We have a Quest unit, which is a bioenergetic screening, and that actually gives us some kind of numeric idea of, besides what comes out on the printout, or like what things we're looking at, what's not vibrating correctly. that will make us look on our own for some things that we already know about, because not everything in the world is programmed into that. But often it will give us something that somebody has put the data in, it's programmed in, and it'll pull it up. And then we check to see which are the most critical for that patient at that point in time.
So you've brought up a couple of times different homeopathy, and there seems one of my first questions is you're saying, is that you said complex homeopathy, right? So there's the classical, and then there's complex.
Yeah,
What?
or compounded, or so classic homeopathy was developed by Samuel Hahnemann, and it is a very exacting science. For a lot of patients and a lot of homeopaths, their intake is sometimes an hour, hour and a half, which most people in general practice can't do. I do block an hour like for atopy dogs and stuff, but to come up with the single homeopathic at the correct dilution is a very challenging to do. And Reckewig in the early 90s, his father was cured of a incurable renal disease, kidney disease, with use of homeopathics. And so when he went to med school, he said he was going to meld the disciplines of homeopathy and Western medicine. And he set out to do that. But what you find in that is that, like, if you look at single dose, single remedy homeopathy, that picture changes, like sometimes within minutes, and then it's asking for a different remedy. So the reality of that in practice is not that easy to do. So what he started doing was putting together symptom pictures or symptom progressions. So if you get the flu, you've got aches, fever, chills, sweats, appetite loss, whatever whatever you're rolling through those, and he put them together. He complexed them, and some of the things they're called a homochord. They'll have three different dilutions of something in it, and it's because the body's a tuning fork. So every cell, every organ, every tissue has its own resonant frequency, and if you put in the frequency that it wants, it will tune itself to that frequency. That it's that, like a tuning fork in the front of the room. If the one in the back of the room is a resonant type, it will start. If you strike the one in the front, the back one in the back will also start singing. So we are a series of we're a sometimes a cacophony, but we're an orchestra of resonant frequencies. So he started putting orchestras together to to give to simplify the treatment. So something like Trameal has something for the heat, pain, redness, swelling, edema, whatever that whole complex of things that happens, like if you sprain an ankle. And it's it's nearly miraculous. We had kids that would like sprain an ankle on a baseball diamond with a ankle this big around, and they were back playing in a week. So you get it on them right away. That swelling goes down really rapidly, and they are back on the court or the field or whatever in very very short order. So with the single remedy homeopathy, you're having to hit every successive um, set of symptoms. So and it is a really amazing. It's a whole system of medicine. The nice thing about it is, for those of us that learned Western medicine, I'm a very Cartesian. I can't keep yin and yang straight. I'd love to do Chinese medicine, but I can't keep yin and yang straight. So you can take what you learned in vet school or med school or whatever, and you can look it up in a word search, and you can find the things that have those things in it, and see which one fits the best. So that's called homotoxicology, or nanopharmacology. They're all nanopharmacology. Anything that's diluted and succussed is a nanopharmacology. It's kind of funny because nanomedicine, nano anything, has become less of a taboo kind of a woo-woo kind of a thing anymore, because we're now the word nanos in our vernacular.
It
So
is.
so we use, they've got some amazing stuff for heart issues and kidney issues, liver issues, and there's good data out there. In fact, one of the I think there's only probably a few substances or a few things that have all four levels of evidence called the mosaic of evidence, and Traumeel is one of them, and vertigo heal's another, where they know the basic research, like the mechanisms of action. They put them in real world trials. They've done meta-analysis on them. So there's all of those bits of evidence. Every type of evidence is in those, has been done on those two that we know of. Zeal may be in there too at this point in time, but not very many things in conventional medicine can actually boast that. In fact, I'm not sure I can come up with any right offhand. And I will say that if in the conventional medicine field, the British Medical Journal, I think it was the British Medical Journal, BMJ, it's been a while. It's been a while ago, a decade or more ago. Actually, did a study where they looked at the safety and efficacy studies. Only 13% at that point in time of conventional therapeutics, drugs, interventions, whatever, only 13% had true safety and efficacy studies where they were proven to be safe and useful. Like more than 50% was unknown. They had no idea. I don't think that's gotten any better.
No, I mean, why would, I mean, especially ones that don't even have liability.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention that, but if recent history tells us anything, yeah.
For sure. Gosh, I feel like I could just like ask you questions for hours and hours and hours, and I think that actually would lead me to my next question for you. And I hope this doesn't catch you too off guard. It sounds like you have some plans coming up. You were talking about a book on thymus
Mm-hmm.
extract, but one of the themes that I got from the conversations that I was fortunate enough to be involved in at the AHVMA conference in 23 was that a lot of the truly holistic, we coined a new term on this podcast not too long ago called fauxlistic for
Called
those
what?
fauxlistic.
Like
So
FAUX, like faux?
yes.
Okay. That doesn't sound
So
very nice.
it actually wasn't me that came up with it. It was another woman that I know, but we just have come across so many allopathic veterinarians who learn acupuncture and then call themselves holistic, but then they put you on a prescription kibble, or they're still doing the jabs every year, and so we're like, okay, they're holistic.
That's well, that's probably more people who learn the medical acupuncture rather than Chinese medicine
Yeah.
because that's more, I don't know, Cartesian, like put a pin in it.
Hmm.
This one does this and that one does that. They're not looking necessarily at the whole of the body like
Exactly.
Chinese practitioners do. The thing is that a lot of those will eventually. I always laughed at people ask me how I got into alternative medicine, and it's like my failures. The things that I couldn't fix that kept coming back, or that there were no conventional answers for. And there's a lot of those. It's just like, well, we'll give you a steroid and you can go. We'll see how long you last. So that just never set very well with me. Most of the people, or a lot of people that really get into integrative medicine, it's because of the things that for which they had no conventional answers. And I think a lot of people, you get your foot in the door, and a lot of those people that, a lot of, it's kind of funny because when I've lectured, mostly at like NABC, BMX, um, we would, when I first started lecturing there, it's like people look at you like you were like out of your mind when you're an integrative practitioner. But then as time went on, there would be people sitting at the table saying, yeah, we're thinking about bringing on a chiropractor or an acupuncturist, or because they clearly see that their clients are looking for that. There's so much
Hmm.
more data available anymore. So I think that even if somebody gets into it as a medical acupuncturist, they will often, in the process of getting continuing education, and their clients, I'm going to tell you, my clients often bring me really interesting things and I will look at them. I may or may not end up incorporating them, but I will look at them because they're, we don't, it's a big world out there and we do not know. There's no end to what I'm learning every day. My hard drive is full. I don't have room for anything else up there. So I have a staff person who's now my external hard drive. I just let her absorb all the new stuff. I have to say, Taylor, do you remember?
Well, so yes, I do hope that it is getting the ball rolling for a lot, if not most or all of them. So, but a lot of the conversations that I did get a chance to hear were that many of the holistic veterinarians, at least that were at the conference that year, are getting to the point where they're thinking about retirement. And so that your knowledge, their knowledge needs to be passed
Pass
along,
on.
especially for these people who are just, these veterinarians who are
Yeah.
like, okay, let me bring in accurate, like this information needs to be available to them at some point down the road when they are ready for it. So that's kind of where my mind was going with this next part is like, how do you see that developing? How do you see yourself putting your brain, your hard drive somewhere for future veterinarians to have this information?
That is really a difficult question. And I have seen some of my colleagues that, are about the same age as me that, couldn't sell their practices and just walked away. And it's like all of that information just is, left with them, that when they walked away from their practice, there was no legacy to leave. They had a legacy, but they took it with them. And that's concerning to me because there is so much information that needs to be passed to the next generation. And one time at the AHMA we had talked about doing like a mentor program, but that's kind of hard to do long distance. And I've actually had one or two veterinarians that would just come and spend a couple of days with me, and we would do like cases that came in. And I love the hands-on part of that, and I don't know, but I don't have the answer for them. I'm actually giving the keynote for the 40th anniversary at AHBMA this year, and that's one of the things I'm going to bring up is what do
Yeah.
we do for this next generation? Because a lot of us are aging out. You're not all going to be Dr. Tucker still practicing in his 90s. I don't know how long I'm going to go, but I have a blood analyzer to pay for now. So when people come in and say, "You're not retiring, are you?" I say, "Well, not till I pay for that blood analyzer." So, we do have to use conventional medicine sometimes. I've got to pay for a blood analyzer. So that is a big worry for me. And I have a colleague has been putting together like a series of um, lectures and stuff for veterinarians to kind of broaden their their knowledge. I can only home talks you can teach basics in a conference, but you can't really teach them techniques. It's kind of like the thymus extract. There's
Mhm.
so many ways to use it, but it has to be presented to people like this is how you do it. Well, one-on-one takes, that just takes up infinite amounts of time, and then it's not repeatable. So, I actually did an autologous blood therapy, just a little tutorial on it at one point in time when we were trying to get veterinarians to do like autologous blood therapy for allergy dogs and stuff. It was like they just can't process the idea of it, even though it is body specific immunotherapy. So, it's immune modulation using the blood as a reference point.
Wow.
So,
Well, I can't say that I have suggestions, but it is on my mind.
well, it's been on mine too. It really has because I hate for, all of the, 30 or 40 years of work that I've been doing, the knowledge I've been accumulating. I'm a librarian basically. That's what my friend Rick Palmquist calls me. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be a compliment or not, but he calls me the librarian. So I archive everything. So I have a ton of data, but I don't know how anybody would be able to utilize that unless it was kind of like the large language models collated into something that somebody can actually use.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that I'm not really a big AI fan, but I'm hoping that will be one gift to humanity. And actually, that Enoch model, everybody should probably look into that because he has put into that. It's not available yet. I think it will be in March or April or something like that. He has put like Joseph Mercola's stuff in there, Green Med Info, the Health Ranger, and it's all going to be free.
Wow.
And regenerative farming, and
Yeah.
so it was called Neo, but I think this one is called Enoch,
Okay.
or the Lost
Yeah.
Books of the Bible.
Yeah, I do find AI to be terrifying and fascinating at the same
Same
time.
time, yeah, it can be used for good or evil, like anything. But I'm hoping that will be something good that comes out of it, is the ability to access massive amounts of data, because those rabbit holes take a long time to go down. And then it's like that 34 gigabytes or so that I've got of just nothing but thymus extract.
Hmm.
Can't collate that. Can't put all of that into a format that's where all that data is rational and reasonable and readable, where I think a language model probably could do that. And it needs to be done because that is one of the most valuable therapeutics out there. It's kind of like all these peptides,
Hmm.
that's been one of the big buzz things. The thymus's peptides. It was one of the original ones. Those were peptides.
Yeah, and Neuralink, I think, scares me even more.
Yeah.
Having access to your body that way.
Yeah.
But I
Maybe if
wonder.
maybe if I was paralyzed and would want help walking, but
Hmm.
I don't want an implant in my brain for
No,
anybody else to access. Whatever's in there can just stay as scrambled as it is right now. I don't want an implant.
no. What I was thinking was like to gather that information out of your brain.
Yeah. Do the
um.
Vulcan mind meld? That's what I
Yes.
need, is the Vulcan mind. Do you remember Star Trek? Was it
Yes.
Star Trek? Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Spock. That's what I need, is somebody that I can just transfer that into their brain. So they don't have to,
Hmm.
so they don't, which is actually why I started teaching, was because, that knowledge is to be shared. It's,
Yeah.
you don't hide it away under a
Right.
basket somewhere. You share it so that the next people don't have to repeat all the work that you did to get to where you are.
Yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
hoping that will, that will eventually. I have started doing some work with Marlene on her lecture series. I'm a little kind of behind on that project, but it's not because I don't have anything else to do. I've only got 7 grandkids, and
Yeah, she is a go-getter. So. All right. Well, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your time. This was a while in the making, and I am just so appreciative of you freely sharing your knowledge, this information, and maybe I'll take you up on coming and shadowing you one day.
good. More than happy to have you.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you again so much. If I know you have your practice in Arkansas and you have someone else who helps you with your Facebook. But if anybody is interested, I know you have a website where you do have you mentioned the like 7 hours of video
Yep,
on the
that's on
thymus.
there under the thymus tab. So all of those are in that drop down. There's a little bit of information on ozone. So I don't know. I don't know. I didn't build it. So I don't even know what's
Start
on
there.
there. Yeah, start
Yeah.
there. And then some of the interviews that I've done are actually posted there as well. The interview that I did with Ty Bollinger for The Truth About Pet Cancer,
Okay.
that whole interview is on my website. So
Awesome. And that is drpjb.com,
yes,
correct?
correct.
Perfect. That will also be in the show notes. Again, thank you so very much, Dr. Broadfoot. It was so wonderful having you. I appreciate you, and just want to tell everybody out there thank you for listening. And I hope you give some extra love to your pets from me and Dr. B today.
Good night, everybody.